Welcome all you masters of dungeons, all you players of characters to Split Screen D&D, the place where we are attacking all things D&D from both sides of the screen. My name's Tom Quinn, resident dungeon master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Wyden's resident player character here at Modern Myth.
And I think we've got a good one for you. We're kind of kicking off something of a series, I guess you could say.
Yes, I think anything more than 2 is a series, right?
Yes. Definitely.
Sweet.
And that is the pillars of gameplay. And I think today we are going to be diving straight into social interaction.
Ooh.
I think it's a good place to start.
Okay.
All
right.
I think let's do I don't know if you want me to start, if you want to start with this one.
Well, see, it's just so combat, the pillars combat is the one that calls me the most. And social's up there. But I'm trying to think of why social is so much fun in D&D. And do you have any thoughts or about that? Like, what is it?
Well, one, I think it's probably the most Dungeons and Dragons experience of all the pillars. And that might sound a little bit odd because when people think of Dungeons and Dragons, they think about slashing up monsters and collecting loot. And but you can slash up monsters and collect loot in a lot of places. There's a lot of places where if you need that fix, throw a dart. If you have a PC or a console in your home, I guarantee you are a couple seconds away from cutting up monsters and collecting loot. It's really, really hard to say the same about what transpires socially at the table. And I think that is really what makes that pillar stand out as something that is really not, and I shouldn't say unique to Dungeons and Dragons, but unique to tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah, because there's lots of other tabletop games that do that as well.
Right.
But yeah, it is something totally unique. And even when you try to replicate it in other things, like it's pretty fun. Have you ever seen like people doing GTA role-playing and stuff like that?
Yeah.
It's interesting, but it's still nowhere near, it feels as personable as you can get at the table with other human beings, looking in their face, looking in their eyes.
Yeah. And I think interestingly, social is probably the pillar that is most removed from our actual everyday lives. I mean, we have social interactions,
Probably.
but generally speaking, I would say, those social interactions are obligatory. We're interacting with coworkers, we're interacting with, you got to pay the guy at the gas station, whatever. And those can be fine interactions, but the social pillar of D&D, really what you're wanting to wring out of that, both as a player, I think, and as a DM, is meaningful interactions. And I think think about all the interactions you have throughout your day as a human being, and how many of them would you classify as meaningful interactions?
Right.
And I think that speaks to kind of why that is such an important element of the game, and why as I said originally, it really is kind of unchallenged or under-challenged by way of experiences. Whereas, let's say, exploration and combat, maybe not to the same extent.
Yeah, and just thinking that as a player, like combat and exploration is like a natural thing. To be able to really engage in the social pillar, it's stepping out on that ledge is really difficult, but it's necessary. So, how do you think a player or a DM is way more social probably than any other player character because of all the characters you have to juggle?
Yeah, certainly by quantity. If I mean, I agree. It's a different animal for sure. But
when would you say, like, how would you say a person get into that social pillar and like really engage in it and be successful in it?
I think I think it's doing it. I think, much as someone who really enjoys their combat, who really likes the nuts and bolts of combat interactions playing out, the way in which the rules interact to allow these awesome combat scenarios to play out in a kind of organized chaos manner. I mean, it should feel like chaos to the characters.
No kidding.
But as the players, if it doesn't feel like there's some semblance of organization, what the hell are we doing?
Right.
I think in the same way that someone can really go down that rabbit hole of building characters, I'm talking about a certain someone here.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Building characters,
I feel attacked.
Thinking about that optimization, but it takes time. When you first came to the game, that may have been something you were interested in, but you really have to know those rules. You have to understand. And on the social side, I think it's the same thing, but there really aren't the same rules in place that kind of govern how or what you should be doing at the table in this space. But I think for anyone, and to whatever degree you extend your social interactions at the table, if that's full on personas, accents, some people go so far as to be in dress, cosplayed out for the occasion. Whatever that is, that whatever happy medium you find in that threshold, it's doing it. You just have to get in there and do it for a couple of reasons. I think one, practice makes perfect, but less about learning the actual process, more about getting comfortable with the process. I think there's a lot of new players, and I have been very surprised by how quickly new players will start reaching. And I tend to lend that to the fact that I'm always introducing new players alongside veteran players that I know are going to help nurture them into that space. And it is infectious when you have some subset of the table who are doing it.
Yeah.
To whatever extreme you guys take it, it's really hard as someone else at the table. It feels awkward to not do it at that point. Whereas when I know as a new player, you're going like, okay, I'm going to be sitting down. There's going to be a bunch of people there, and they've probably played forever. And you're feeling like it's going to be really awkward when I have to say that first thing. But when you have to say that first thing and things are already going on around you in this kind of immersive experience, I certainly think that you can kind of turn those tables. But like anything, I really think it just comes down to doing it. It's repetition, whether that's at the table or, I think there's a lot to be said for what can be done away from the table as well. I don't want to go there quite yet because I want to give you a chance to kind of give your 2 cents on the same subject.
Well, I liked that you said just do it, and I was just thinking, it's like, well, one of the things I like about social is it's not really that penalized. And maybe you have to convince a king or something, but most of the time you're just talking to someone. If you say if you flunder up something or something doesn't quite work out or you mix up your accent, whatever, it's not a big deal. Versus combat, we're like, oh shoot, I decided to jump off a ledge instead of hitting the guy. I mean, it's you get punished severely. So it's such there's a very low bar to entry, and it's one of those things like you're saying, it's a social skill, right? So it's a skill. The more you do it, the better you get. And do what you're comfortable with. You don't have to do an accent. You don't have to do anything to your voice. You don't have to do, dude. My speeches are horrible 80% of the time. They're pretty bad. Every time I walk away, it's like, man, that was a poor speech.
There's been some solid speeches. There's been some solid moments. But I think that's a testament to the fact that you need to rapidly get okay with the fact that what you've got going on up here, that perfect, awe-inspiring thing you're going to say when the moment comes, that sometimes it doesn't come out the way that you've been thinking about it. And that does get a little bit to the outside of game thing. That's not to say, pre-script everything you're going to, don't try to play that game. No. But it does mean that there's certainly opportunities outside of the game to be thinking as your character, to be, you can conjure up all manner of scenarios without a DM sitting there giving them to you,
right?
And kind of just get a sense of, how does my character act? When my character gets angry, how angry does my character get? When so there's some places that you can
look like a crazy. I've totally done this. Look like a crazy person and talk like Kel and put myself in situations. And even at the table, I can be like, oh, I sense something like a speech is happening because Kel's the paladin. He's got to give speeches. It's like, okay, I can sense it. So I already start prepping in my head the key points I want to hit. And then in the final moment, I do it. But I flub it all the time. And it's fine. Yeah. It's not that big a deal.
I think that's the biggest barrier to people investing themselves in social is a concern. And something that we touched in a different episode was kind of the barrier of fear. That I think, and again, if what your table likes to do socially is this kind of, let's say, narrative prescriptions, like my character wants to go buy the barmaid a drink, as opposed to putting on the character and going and buying the barmaid a drink. Great. That's what your table's doing. But I think there's people who, if they're wanting to cross that barrier into what I would call, and this is not to denigrate the former, but what I would call a richer social experience. I don't think that there's any arguing. I mean, you may not get much out of social. Don't emphasize it in your game. But if you do, I think there's no question that adding persona, that doesn't have to be an accent, that doesn't have, but it's an attitude, it's a feeling. Adding that to your NPCs, adding that to your player, really does start to tell a tremendous amount of story in between the lines. You might say something, and it's more how you said it than what you said. And especially early in the game, when your party is kind of getting to know each other, getting introduced to each other, in some cases, it's just the way a player orders a drink. You know, a snap of the fingers and a tap on the table is a very different way of ordering a drink than going, "Oh, excuse me, ma'am, could I have another ale, please?"
Right.
It's so I really think that crossing that barrier, whereas I agree, the barrier to entry for the social pillar of Dungeons and Dragons is very, very low. And constructed by the person who is standing on the other side of that barrier. However concerned they are about looking like a fool at the table, that is their barrier to getting more out of the social, out of this pillar, out of this space.
Yeah.
And I can tell everyone at home, if you have been playing the game for a while, or if you're new to the game, figure out what you want out of the game. But if you're wanting richer social experiences, it's incumbent on you as a DM, as a player, to break down that barrier and just go for it. And I will say, in my experience, when it starts happening at the table, it's, like I said, it's infectious. It's very difficult to not start feeling this momentum, socially speaking, when players begin really actuating that pillar. From a player perspective, I do think there's some nuance. Like you mentioned, that, a DM is obviously putting on a lot of personas and engaging in a very broad spectrum of social interactions. But as a player, what would you say, like, what is the most important consideration that you have in your mind for really getting the most out of that pillar? And I think you're a good candidate for this, because I think fundamentally, like, if you had to subscribe to one pillar only, you probably subscribe to the combat pillar.
Right.
I know you really get that a lot out of the game from that.
That's my favorite by far. But I do enjoy.
Well, I was gonna say you have gone above and beyond in the social side. What allowed you to get more of that out of that experience compared to prior campaigns that we've played?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is how interesting things could get. Because in this campaign, we went really hard into our character creation and our backstories, and we really knew. And we didn't know each other. There's so many like intricacies we don't know about each other. So the social was really able to bring that to light. So especially at the beginning, it was just fun sitting at a tavern, drinking beers, and just like asking questions and learning about each other. Doing it in an organic way was sometimes difficult. But yeah, I think that was one of the things that really turned me on. Is it took the immersion and just the depth of the game to just such a huge next level.
Right. And I think if executed well, the meaning that you can impart into the rest of the game through the social, if let's say you approach some lord who's got a quest for you, and the lord goes, "Please help me with this quest. I have a quest for you. Here's what I need you to do. Can you go kill this monster?"
Yes, I will go kill this monster. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, nothing wrong with that. Sometimes that's actually what you want. Sometimes it doesn't need to have, an overly convoluted meaning. But absolutely, there are encounters. There are plot hooks. There are adventures that your characters can go on where what they are striving towards means so much more because they can reel back to a very powerful motivation from who they got the encounter for. It could even be one of the players is powerfully motivated, and generally, I think that fuse is ignited in the social pillar. It's a compelling reason. A distraught mother whose child has been kidnapped is a very different thing than a distraught mother whose child has been kidnapped.
Right.
And I think that by really as a DM, and I would say the social pillar for those DMs out there, if you are wanting more of that from your players, there isn't a better example. There isn't a better example of lead by example. If you want more of that at your table, start investing yourself in those spaces. Make your players look at you awkward, like are you really gonna make me do this right now? Like, are you really gonna, and again, make is maybe too strong a word, but certainly it's hard to just you go like, what could I get you there, boy? And you go like, my player orders 2 ales. And I think that it gets hard to maintain that. If you the more that you impart in that space, the more it just kind of organically asks like, hey, someone take this baton, someone run with this.
And they might not right away, which could be really hard.
Right. And that's something I absolutely don't think should ever be foist mid-session.
Right.
It's something you should be talking with your players about if you're wanting more out of the social. And as a player, the same, if that's something that you're wanting more in the game, it could well be a deal where your DM is all about social, but just assumes that everyone in the party wants to kill monsters. And so just make your wants known in that space, because I do think social is one of those ones. It's probably carries the most varied contention about the game. I don't think there's too many people who go, I don't like when people run too much combat. I don't like when people, combat is combat, exploration. I mean, these are such cornerstone elements. And I really think it's not a bad example of the divide between kind of this new resurgent D&D, which I would say has elevated the social pillar to, in some cases, I would say elevated it above the other pillars. And I wouldn't necessarily advocate for that, but I do think that the social pillar in older editions, and obviously all editions were what you made of them. So it's not like, all of a sudden they released 5th edition and now everyone's free to finally play the social games they wanted.
Right.
They've always been there, and I'm sure people have always been playing high social games.
But there's that one group that made it very popular, and yes.
But and I think and the thing is I think that part of the reason that garnered so much attraction is because I think people have an innate longing to consume narratives and to create their own. And it's tough to find a medium where you can do that with such little overhead.
It's so true. I mean, just buy a couple books and you can make it work.
Yeah, and I think that sitting down at the table, the alternative, and I think we've touched on this before, certainly from a DM standpoint, the alternative of, say, writing a book, and is now you got to find someone to read it, and then hopefully they'll share their feelings on it. And and everyone's sitting down at the table and building this story together. The social, I think, pillar really does encapsulate the narrative construction of the game.
Right.
And I think certainly the other pillars, all of these overlap. There's
I was
a Venn diagram.
I almost want to go in 2 different directions now. Do you want to talk about trying to work social into maybe more combat things, or how to work your social role-playing into exploration, which would be fun as heck to talk about? Or maybe one thing I was thinking about is how amazing social is in breaking up, really helping with the pacing of the game. Because if you just go combat, and man, it gets stressful.
Right.
And some really nice social. In fact, we often ask for this. Like, man, Tom, we just want to sit and talk at a tavern for a little bit. We're talking,
Right. Yeah. When there is a narrative that is kind of pulling you to act, pulling you to, do something here, be the heroes here. It's a really I think a really special space when you
Mhm.
find those gaps in between, where players are able to reflect on the things that they've done.
That's what I was just thinking. It's almost a way for us to process them as people and also process them as our characters would process them,
Right.
which makes it everything more meaningful.
Yeah, and I think as you are talking about that, and again, so much can be revealed about in one of the really early encounters that you guys had, to give everyone at
Was
home
it the fish, the rafts? Was that it?
No,
Your best encounter ever
let's
made?
not talk about let's not talk about the Quippers. Oh Jesus, it wasn't actually long off of that. So again, a little backstory or context for everyone at home. You guys had fought your way to Black Spire to deliver a specimen, an undead,
A special zombie.
yeah, an undead. What had been a paladin. One of the two that had returned from Chult, the plague-ridden island in the south. The other one had escaped, and you guys had kind of only had intimations that he was out there in the ether, and ultimately came face to face with him in the dungeon of Blackspire. In fact, he kind of came up your ass. No wording. But no, he kind of.
This is a family program, Tom.
This is a family program, which is why I meant it exactly the way I said it, not the way it sounded.
You guys need to educate your kids earlier.
No, but you guys are standing there. You've just kind of had this interaction with Alistair, the necromancer that you went there to treat with.
I loved him, by the way.
Yeah, you.
I got along with him so well. We were best buds.
As you pushed into that space, you kind of finished up there, and as you turn to leave, you're face down with the kind of gaunt, emaciated, rotting corpse of Brother Orm, who was the other paladin that escaped. You guys had a pretty tense encounter with him as he had a blade that was doling out some pretty gnarly, necrotic kind of damage. After that fight, though, it was the first time that Katerina, she's had she's had her own backstory scraps and what have you, but she it was really the first time that she endured her own mortality during the campaign, and there was an interaction where you guys were all sitting around after the fact. And that was like, for her, that was it. Like there was a massive amount of second guessing this lifestyle. I mean, what to that point had been kind of like, hey, we're adventurers. Look, we're doing good for the realm. We're kind of out to, and then shit hit the fan. And there was so much exchange between characters. Whereas Kel, who has existed as a soldier for so long, this was a Tuesday.
Yeah.
It was a very different experience, and watching you guys find a common ground, especially amidst some tension that was existing between your characters. There was some really cool opportunities in those social interactions. And I would urge DMs who are out there who are, you're moving through your narrative, your pacing's going along, everything's feeling great. Don't shy away from the opportunities to open that space up for players to find those social interactions.
Yeah.
Because again, some really, really meaningful role play can come out of those spaces. So I know the temptation can kind of be there to be like, what's in the next room, that big thing's coming, and kind of go like, all right, let's speed it up. When you are in those spaces where characters are engaging in the social pillar, keep those same sharp eyes on for opportunities to spring a trap on someone, or opportunities to, put a cool twist in the exploration that's been going on. Keep those same glasses on for when a moment is becoming meaningful, and give opportunity to clear that scene and let that play out, because in some cases, what could take sessions for a DM to coax out of a party will come out very organically and in a very meaningful way between the party.
And it's one thing when we find out from each other, and especially early on, sometimes there's a lot of awkward spaces. And something that I've always appreciated about you is you've let us dwell a little bit in the awkwardness. You weren't trying to rush us. Sometimes when you're like, guys, we like haven't done shit today. Like, can we leave the tavern, please? But
Yeah, there's definitely times, but
but for the most part, it's like you let us play out a scene until we as players feel like we're good. Which sometimes that ends in an awkwardness. Not every conversation is freaking Emmy worthy, critical role worthy, but it's never am I like, man, why did we have that conversation?
right. And I think taking time as a DM. I mean, you're probably already doing this in your own games. Um, if this is one of the pillars that you really lean on and you really like to develop, but that idea of, and I will actually, if you won't say it, I'm going to. I have let you guys dwell to a fault in some cases. But I really do think the lesser of two evils is allowing that to play out.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, because there's definitely times when it's like, why are we still talking? But
Yeah.
because we didn't have I don't know if maturity is the right word. We just didn't have the like, okay, this is a good place to call it. We just need it. I'm going to sleep now. Like how to end it.
And I think that you as a player or as a DM in the social space, you will get cues from your players who value the other pillars more. That there has been enough social in this space.
Have I ever given you a cue like that before?
Yeah, I've gotten that cue. I've definitely gotten and so it's one of those things where be cognizant of those. Like, you're engaging in the space, and I know you've got a lot on your shoulders. Maybe you're running multiple characters, maybe you're, but just reading your players' engagement, you have players who engage differently with the different pillars in the game, and you may have players who are heavily engaged in a social experience. Absolutely allow that to blossom and play out. But also there are times in which you can feel it as a DM. I think players can feel it around the table. There are times when social is just there for social sake. It's what's transpiring isn't meaningful enough to justify. And that just, I think, takes playing the game as much as we talked about learning.
And that might happen every once in a while. It's not the end of the world for sure, but just because time is valuable and you're already sitting down for how many hours, you want to make sure those hours are meaningful.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about kind of pivoting, because you talked about a fork in the road here that we could have gone a couple of different ways.
Oh boy, not to think back to what I said.
But I guess I was going to say, I think we just coming off of what we were talking about, there's a fair bit to be said, especially if you are a social centric DM or at least a equal opportunity pillared DM. I guess the question that I have, and I think this is a question that I would ask for any of the pillars, as a player, what is the difference between an awesome social encounter and a social encounter? Like what takes a social encounter to the next level? And whether this is a true encounter, as in like, you're making skill checks and things like that, or just a simple conversation between players. You take your pick, but what would you say? What's the difference? Like what could be implemented?
We've said the word a lot, and I think it just resonates. It's got to be meaningful. You could have like an Emmy speech, but if there's nothing happening behind it, then what's the point? Like, you can use all the flowery words you want and you could nail the accent perfectly. But if it's what you're saying is just not you or important or have anything to do, it's just, you're just filling space.
And I think probably to a greater or lesser extent, that importance is probably incumbent upon the DM in this space. I mean, there needs to be some weight that is asking, hey, step out there and give them that big speech, rally the troops. Well, if you're just rallying them to go to the mess hall and eat dinner,
you need the opportunities, but it's also up to, like, the player has to take you might give them the door, but they have to walk through it. So if you're a player, it's pick your moments, know when to. I harped on this I think a while ago. Don't be that guy who tries to always hog the spotlight, which can be a negative for the social players. They're always dominating the social sphere. If you don't feel like your character is really well suited for that particular situation, shut up and let someone else take a stab at it and see what happens. If they need support, 100%, but let other people talk.
Yeah. I really like that notion because I think oftentimes there are players, or I should say more probably, well, players and characters who are really well suited at navigating the social pillar of the game.
Especially if they're like a character built for it, then I mean, it makes sense that they'd
Yeah.
be doing most of the talking.
But I think that does not absolve them from making space for characters who maybe aren't as proficient in that area. Nor does it absolve a character who, you know, the player who is standing in that shadow from occasionally taking the reins and, you know, making the most out of that space. Now, again, everybody at the table is getting different things. If they, you know, had to rank order their pillars within the game space, so that is not a call for someone who just gets nothing out of social to. I think that is much as in combat we might be engaging with the world based on those strengths that we're, you know, I'm not gonna do something that is totally out of the skill purview of my class,
Right.
generally speaking. I think the same can be said for the kind of operating in that social pillar space is don't feel like just so you can check the box of, oh, hey, I did a big social thing.
Yeah.
You know, there are absolutely characters who say nothing. I was reading a story about the guy who made the post was just talking about their campaign and kind of trying to suss out the feelings of the players in the party as one of the players in the party was playing a mute.
Ooh.
Which is a really, I mean, there's some very interesting social implications in that, you know, I mean, is that person playing that character as just a means of sidestepping the social bar altogether?
Or is it like the ultimate challenge?
I mean, and the thing is I think there's either way, there's something compelling about that. So
Yeah, actually, the more I think about it, the funner that sounds. Funner is not a word,
but it is one of those things where, so, you know, there's some interesting tie-ins to kind of the broader aspect. And with you being, I know that generally when you're thinking about building awesome characters, you're probably not going like, man, this one's going to talk so good, you know, like that. But there is some consideration in that space for the fact that maybe the thing that really does make your character heroic is their ability to charm the pants off of anyone.
Yeah.
You know, there's many a bard out there who I'm sure thinks of themselves this way. Their DMs very likely would tell a different story.
Yeah,
but
their DMs love them, I'm sure.
fuck the bard.
Bouncing off that real quick, because again, a little known fact, I like to think mechanically. I think it is really nice when you're building out your character to figure out, because you have three skills that are social. Persuasion, intimidation, and deception, is to kind of figure out, yeah, my character fits more this, and then become proficient in that skill, just so you have a social skill in your back pocket that you don't feel totally, absolutely useless in social situations.
And quite frankly, I would say it doesn't matter how socially inept your character is. You could be a slobbering 6 intelligence orc if that's what you wanted to be.
A paladin. Whatever.
Well, you're not slobbering most of the time, but it's like a gentle stream of drool.
It's quite a beautiful stream of
it's got drool. A silvery glow to it. No, but the thing is but you're also a paladin, so you're fundamentally, there is some charisma backing your ability to interact. I would say when I think of kind of the least socially inclined tropes, they tend to be the brutish barbarian, you know, character who just kind of stands and grunts in the back.
But when that barbarian starts yelling at you, then that intimidation comes in, and you're like, wow, that, you know, he said something.
And I like that you touched on the mechanical side of things, because I really do think that these go hand in hand, whichever order you want to do them in. We've kind of already discussed the order that we think about doing things.
Yeah.
But
I'm still right.
But I was pretty sure that episode that you decided that I had won the argument. I think you said, didn't you say something?
I don't think I've ever once said no. I think
no, but that social skill, picking one. Now maybe you're a much more social character and you want to be nuanced and be able to charm some people and deceive others. But there really is no character I think you can conceive of that wouldn't revel in successfully intimidating, deceiving, or persuading another character. And that will really begin to, like, that should be your stake in the ground for your entire persona. If fundamentally, when you need people to do stuff, do you deceive them, persuade them, intimidate them? Yeah. We're kind of getting to a mechanical space. But I think it is hugely informative to the way, like, if you've made intimidation your primary skill, that is not to say some situations don't require a softer touch.
Oh yeah.
Maybe just roll the worst. And this, I will say, this happens, I think, more in the social sphere than maybe anywhere else, but players try it all the time. You filthy sons of guns out there. Is when you go, all right, give me a XYZ check. And they go, like, could it be a totally different check? This is not an uncommon thing from any players, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we do it as bad anymore, but we used to do this all the time.
Yeah. I mean, virtually every check, you just be like, can it be the one that I have expertise in instead?
Yeah.
I would be, but I think probably because I think the social space is just a little more loosely tethered to the hard and fast rule set. It's not so much the ask for a different role, it's the let me conceptualize how I can act in a totally unrealistic way such that I can make the role that I'm good at.
See, yeah, and there I think the biggest problem is you're not being authentic to your character.
Right. And I think that there are times where the barbarian orc needs to try and persuade someone. It will likely be a fail. And as we talked about in the failure episode, it will probably be a moment that people look back and be like, hey, remember when Grutok tried to convince that gnome to give us all his candy, like by being nice instead of
Where did you come up with that scenario? Gnomes and candy, huh?
Gnomes and candy.
Anyway.
Everyone knows. I mean, just
everyone knows gnomes.
Check your gnome lore, buddy.
I guess I do, right? But one thing,
born with a lollipop in hand.
Jesus. One thing I do like about social compared to a lot of the other pillars is I don't feel failure is as punishing. So I'm not as afraid to. Kel has been doing a lot of intimidation checks,
right?
Which is not what he's trained in. But that's just when I feel like when Kel is like making like he's going to be intimidating a certain, and he's just going to do it. So I just roll with it. And I've never been like, man, I should have tried a persuasive track.
Yeah. And I really think and I absolutely get why it's a difficult thing to do for the same reason that when you're in combat and you go, well, I can roll with a +9 and slash them with the sword, or I can pick up that rock and I can roll with like a +3.
Right.
And and not to mention you add the damage differences. And,
yeah.
But no one would fault someone for slashing the sword there. I think that's one of the core differences between social and combat. And that is not to say play your own game. You do you.
Yeah.
But I really think the moment that people are going to look back on is going to be the true to character failure. Or again, the moment people really look back on is when you go, I have a 6 intelligence. I'm going to go ahead and make that Arcana check. And you crit. You roll. Like those are the moments where, and the thing is it's because you have subverted all expectation in the moment. Everyone expects a high charisma character to be able to woo the barmaid, maybe gets their tab paid for, or what have you.
Getting those sweet pants.
I mean, depends
Bard
on the
life.
Yeah, you're a paladin, all right? Button it up. button it up behind your
For now,
your
I'm gonna multi-class in a bar.
plate mail chastity belt.
No, my goddess is cool. She lets me do what I want.
That's true, but only with her, really. I mean, so no, I think so what I love about, and I really want to start kind of rounding out this
good
social
call.
pillar here. What I love about social as a DM is, I think to some extent it is to how loosely tethered it is to the rule set. There's really no template, I guess you could say, for what a social encounter should look like. I mean, that could be your magical decanter of whiskey suddenly springs to life and has a personality of its own. And
can I have one of those?
You guys have one.
We do?
You took it.
Yes. I didn't know we had that.
Yeah.
Who took that?
Aster took it.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
Like an alcoholic teenager.
Yeah. But I think like you can do a lot in the social space by way of as a DM allowing your players to tell the story. You know, I mean, you're doing a lot by way of creating events in the world that kind of pull them through this narrative space. But when someone is saying something that's meaningful about the campaign, I mean, almost certainly it's happening within that social pillar. And I would say all the better that it's coming out of a player's mouth. And as DMs, the more that we can nurture space for our players to do that, the more that we can give them important things to think about and important things that they need to interact with the world to suss out, whether that's acquiring important information, acquiring equipment. I mean, a simple interaction with a smithy could well be could well turn into a much more meaningful thread that carries the story in a different direction.
Yeah.
So I think that the social space is, as a DM, I think it's actually where a lot of DMs, it's probably the biggest pull to sit in the DM chair, because everybody, I mean, I think everybody likes combat more or less. But if you love combat, I don't know. I feel like my perception is if combat was my main squeeze, I'd want to be on the hero side of it. Because as a DM, you lose them all. Right up until you don't.
No, unless you're good. Then most good DMs, they
really good DMs win
always win
the very first encounter.
Make new characters,
and then they send everybody home and tell them thanks for showing up. Thanks for spending the last week thinking up your character. And
what's that one of the Onion movie with the they're playing D&D in the library?
Oh, what is it? I can't remember his name. Proteus the Invincible.
He just wrecks all the kids. Yeah. That, if you're doing that, you shouldn't be a DM. But
and so I think that's kind of, it's a space where you can suss out stories in without doing anything. You're literally just stepping away and kind of watching things unfold for your players.
Which is also probably nice for DM, is that you can kind of just like let things go for a little bit. You know,
if it's intra-party, absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously, the other end of it is
it's way more intense. From the player side, I was going to mention, I don't know if we have time for it, and you can stop me. What could be a negative side of social?
Let's do it
Really quick, just especially player to player. If you are the actor in your group, don't. It's kind of like the min-maxer. Don't force people to be a min-maxer if they're not min-maxer. If you're a narrator or an actor and no one else wants to meet you on that level, don't force it on other people. I'm not saying don't do it at your table, but don't look at them expectantly like, hey, why aren't you guys doing what I'm doing? Hey, did you know it'd be so much more cooler if you had an accent? Like, no, let them enjoy the game. They're supposed to enjoy the game. You know, it's a personal thing.
Yeah, and I think hearkening back to one of the very early points we made in these discussions, if you're finding that, and this goes for whatever you get out of the game, if you're finding that you are just every time you're really wishing you were engaging more in social, I think out of game, there are things you can do to entice other players into a more social experience.
Okay.
But if you're not, if you're doing what you can to say, hey, what do you guys think about this?
Right.
There are tables out there that would love to have you doing your thing.
Absolutely love to have an actor at their table.
So keep that in mind. And this goes for any of the pillars.
Yes.
Is, I think as DMs, as far as I'm concerned, the goal of a DM is to throughout whatever stories are being told at the table, to try and provide a certain amount of representation of all the pillars. And now you should skew that representation to some extent based on what if no one at your table wants to do hex grid explorations, well, then maybe run your overland travel really streamlined and kind of you get from point, if exploration isn't their thing, if everyone at your table is social's not their thing, but a lot of that just comes from knowing your table and scaling your game accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the last couple of things that I would have on my mind regarding social is to kind of be thinking about the weight of the respective pillars in the game. And by weight, not necessarily, weight's maybe not the best term, but when I think about the social pillar, it's really hard to conceive of an intimate encounter in the world space. And I'm not meaning that like the whole paladins coming up your ass thing. Does he? No. But does. These the types of scenes that would be playing out in a film where the camera's pushed in, it's a tight shot, there's something meaningful being exchanged.
Right, the Aragorn and Rhaenys kneeling over Sean Beam in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, a perfect example. And the great part is you use that example. I was just about to pivot into very likely those are happening right on the heels of a fight. Right on. I mean, that's a perfect example.
Near-death experiences really bond a party.
And segueing in the fight /
the best pillar, combat.
Space. Yeah. Well, I here's something that I will say is I think much like when we talked about encounters is finding ways that you can layer multiple experiences into the same encounter adds a lot of texture. Finding something that I would say makes social awesome, but it also subsequently makes any of the other pillars awesome, is a combat encounter does not simply need to be the entire party is hacking on a troll until someone finally throws acid on it. Amidst all of that hacking and fighting and struggling and doing everything in your power to survive, which I think can sometimes be lost in the mechanical aspect of combat playing out. There are huge opportunities in the combat pillar to interject social. And just as we said, social can add so much weight to really why you're doing something. The last fight that we just concluded, a number of social elements. And one I'll bring up because I actually think it was a really potent social moment was you guys had accounted for the context is a little bit broad, so I'm not going to try to get too crazy on it, but effectively 3 crystals need to be activated via a sacrifice. Someone needs to sacrifice themselves such that they might bind this fetal god that is attempting to take its true power. 2 of those had been activated. And one more needed to be activated.
That's going to come back to bite me too, yeah.
And in the moment, I don't think there could be any argument that you could have used your turn doing anything more optimized. And this is an interesting thing because it was basically a social encounter. One of the men who was kind of serving alongside you, he happened to be an orc, but they were these kind of group of big bruisers. Some of them have already been killed.
If I recall her correctly, that's her name.
That's
Did I get one of them right?
No. Maxie and Fisty were still in the fight, and there basically was no one. I mean, short of one of the party members going, "I'm going over there and doing
Which
it."
they were starting to.
Aster was intending to go activate it.
Yeah.
And turning to him and saying, "Buddy, there's something I need you to do." Maybe it wasn't phrased.
Yeah, what was an
that
interesting thing that happened was I first started being like, "Hey, just punch it, no big deal, man. It'll get rid of everything." And then Kel's like, I think he had a turn of like, "Oh, I'm using him. This is not good." And he's like, "Hey, if you do this, you'll get revenge on everyone." Kind of was breaking, like, kind of.
Right. And yeah, that's what I really wanted to touch on. Was it started out as what I was about to ask you for a deception roll.
Yeah.
And as I was going, okay, what am I going to get? What role do I need here?
Right.
You started pivoting a little bit in what you said, and you kind of went a lot more straight up with it.
Yeah.
And it completely changed the tone of that engagement for sure.
Yeah, and I'm really glad it went that way. But
it was one of those. It was one of the moments throughout combat, and there are many of these that present themselves, and this is a very explicit moment.
We'll keep going.
But it's a great example of by rallying him to do that. Now, again, with the low intelligence and some other things, there's a number of ways you probably could have tackled that.
Mm-hmm.
I would also, like I said, I would subsequently argue that there was no attack, no ability, nothing you could have done that would have been more meaningful to that combat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say, I would say that might be an oddity. It's rare that being able to
I think that's a pretty big oddity.
Yeah, I'm not advocating that. Hey, look for those opportunities where it's the best thing you can do in combat.
I want to try to charm this zombie. That's what I'm going to do. We could be best friends.
You are a paladin. I think there's many a paladin out there who knows that zombies just haven't seen the light of their god or goddess.
Or you're an evil paladin, which is also.
But my real point in saying all of that is there are absolutely opportunities, and I think this is the combat space is the hardest place in which to maintain the social pillar. Okay. Because it's really easy. I mean, you got to think about this.
Okay.
Your character is fighting for their life. Mm-hmm. How many times have you said something at the table during combat where you sounded as though you thought you might die in the next?
Yeah.
It's a hard place. And that is not a criticism. It is a hard place to enact that. But where you can find those opportunities, those are your opportunities. Mm-hmm. You're hitting a little pepper, a little salt into your spicing combat with, if it's turning and shouting at someone, full blown, like, we need to get the fuck out of here. Things are falling apart. Things are going bad. If it's turning to your party member who is looking bad and just saying, like, I'm sorry, or, I mean, it's whatever the amount of weight that starts getting injected in that situation when the same social ties that have held this party together, the laughter that's transpired over ale at the tavern, a shoulder to cry on after a particularly bad fight, sitting around a campfire in a miserable dungeon, all of those moments have so much flavor and weight to them. And I would encourage everyone, allow that to transpire into the other pillars. And that can be said for all of the pillars. Yeah, allow them to overlap. But
sure, but I think social is the one that does it most naturally.
And I think that it's one of the strengths of that pillar is you can inject social anywhere. And don't use the fact that you're not in an obviously social space as an excuse to not be thinking about, what would my character think, feel, say in this circumstance? Someone they really care about, their best friend is standing over there and just got doused in acid. They're screaming, they're flailing around. I mean, like, what do they do in that instance? And that's another, I would say, beyond the actual social actuation, when you're thinking in that space, I think you're not going to like this point. I think if you're saying, what does my character think? What does my character feel? What does my character... In some cases, that's a headspace that is going to demand you to de-optimize what you're doing in combat out of just the sheer pull. Now,
unless you build a character that is specifically battle, like he's a battle tactics through and through. So that's where Cal can kind of do that. And I was going to say, one thing I really like that you did is you stopped us talking about tactics or talking about I'm going to do this. We can't talk about that at the table. We have to keep that all to ourselves, and we just do it. And then we're able to talk a little bit during it. We have like a sentence maybe as free interact, but
The
that's
typical,
it.
just you're shouting across the battlefield.
But
or,
in those instances, we can actually Cal, outside of combat, Cal is actually quite a nice guy. He's really kind to listen to you. In battle, he is giving barking orders. He is taking command. So it's seeing that side of him comes out in combat, which is really cool. That wouldn't happen if that didn't happen.
What I really like about the social, like when you have taken social and cast it in the combat space, is whereas Katarina for our campaign is the face of the campaign within the social sphere.
A rogue. A rogue versus a paladin. And it's the rogue that's the face.
Yeah. But she's also like monster persuasion, monster deception.
Yeah, she took expertise in it, so I can't say anything anymore.
Yeah. No, but what I love about it is on the battlefield, you are the face.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's it's another call to say, if the person at the bar who jumps up on the bar top and does a little jig and pulls out their loot and goes, this is why you should give me free things. Bards. We're referencing bards a lot in this.
It's because you can't help it. There's just that amazing.
I mean, they are hyper charismatic. So if you have a player at your table who's consistently able to pull that shit off, great. But there might be other aspects of the game where you have huge social opportunities. Maybe you're a brooding kind of fighter type who generally doesn't, certainly wouldn't climb up on the bar top and start dancing a jig. Your social opportunities might exist in one of the other pillars. So don't switch your social brain off when you're in those spaces, because those opportunities will present themselves. Absolutely. And it's a really cool thing for the other players and the DM to be able to see you engage with socially in a very different way.
Right, absolutely. I could keep going down that. I don't know if we want to keep going.
No. In fact, I think we're. We've talked a fair bit about social. What you got?
Hey, you at home. I want you to put in the comments. I want you to rate your favorite pillars, because I think social does fit into everyone really well. But which are your favorients?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. A hierarchy.
Yeah.
First, second, third.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, why are you sitting down at the table? In what order?
Yeah, combat first. But I mean, beyond that,
a harder question, because I was thinking about the same question, is if you had to do away with one pillar.
Ooh, okay.
That's tough.
Screw my thing. Yes.
No, well, throw in both. Just keep it rolling.
And also just let us know how you're doing. Hey, how you doing down there? Just say I'm doing good. We'll give you a little thumbs up.
Yeah. And we'll definitely know you watched the whole thing if you throw in the comments, jumps on the bar top and does a merry jig. There's virtually no way that you didn't.
Yeah, if you put that in the comments, we know you're in our special VIP club.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know what that means, but you're there.
For those of you who are catching us on YouTube right now, also know that you can catch us on all of this content is available via podcast everywhere that you get your podcast. We are.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, we're on everything
across the board now. So
we're getting fancy.
Oh yeah. I think give me just a synopsis, a real quick summary of the player position, kind of what we talked about. If you need to add any extra flavor,
I'll try to keep it succinct. So as a player, social, what makes it amazing as a player is it really allows you to embody your character. And as you begin to embody your character, you get to see it just makes the whole world more immersive, right? And also allows you to just make so much more interesting relationships with the players at your table and with your DM. Some of my favorite relationships are with his DM PCs. But there is that fear there. And hey, don't do what you're comfortable with. But if you're like, hey, that kind of sounds fun, as you said, just do it. Try it.
Yeah, I would definitely say if you have an inclination to try it, push the envelope. Step out of your it will be out of your comfort zone.
And you might feel awkward. Yeah, you'll feel awkward. But you're always awkward the first time you try something that you've never done before, unless you're crazy good at it or something.
A bard.
Yeah, or you have acting experience or something weird like that. But yeah, so that would be my big thing. And for as a player to DMs, Yeah, I love when you give us these hooks where you allow us to explore that space, and I kind of hinted on there, making interesting characters for us to interact with.
Yeah.
Uh,
I really think that, as with any aspect of the game, if you're putting interesting things in the world, your players will interact with them.
Mhm,
And if those interesting things happen to be characters with personas, with voices, with whatever it is, your characters generally will respond in kind.
Mhm.
Not always, but just you. I mean, by this point, you know your tables. You know your. I would certainly say DMs who are looking to start a table know that you are the cornerstone of what that experience is going to be. And if you run your games by saying the barmaid brings you 8 drinks and sets them on the table and then she leaves,
I give
then-
you 2 gold ad.
yeah, I mean, and again, that sounds a little bit like a denigration. It isn't. It's just if that's what you want, you just don't get much out of the personas and the voices.
Yeah.
Great. But I will advocate for, there is no experience like it.
Mhm.
Or I should say,
Tabletop,
outside of tabletop gaming.
Yeah.
Consider that for people who love the game. That great. You love the combat. You love the looting. The social can make all of that more meaningful. If the reason you're there clearing out that dungeon is driven by some emotionally tethered motivation. When you finally slay that boss at the end of the dungeon, you're going to know you're going to be able to go back to those people and they will be properly rejoicing. Not the players. The town seems overjoyed that you slayed them. I mean,
Yeah,
you
it makes
want
things more
you want
meaningful.
and so don't. I would say don't shy away from it. I know it's not everybody's first pick as far as the pillars go. But I think it's one of the pillars that really, the more you do it, the more you like doing it. And I think that comes from someone who loves the social or someone who full-blown power game min-maxes. It really does grow on you, I guess.
Really does. Yeah.
So all you DMs out there, I'd love to hear in the comments. I know we touched on comments in a second. I'd just love to hear, I want to hear what the most meaningful social interaction that you've ever witnessed play out between. It could be one of your NPCs and a character, or between 2 characters. But talk with us about those moments that are going on at the game and the ways that you're integrating social, maybe in ways that would defy expectation.
Ooh, or some really cool social thing that was like totally unexpected. Those are fun.
Yeah, I mean, I love reading that stuff. I love thinking about the ways I can integrate those.
Inspires us.
Yeah, exactly. Beyond that, I think we are just about wrapped up
Let's do this.
on pillar 1, the social pillar. You want to take us out, sir?
All right, give me a situation.
Well, we were just talking about social the entire time.
Yeah, we did.
So I think it's only fitting. Your glass looking a little low there, boy. What can I get you?
You're a nice guy, and I like you. I'll take everything, 'cause the world is yours.